All right, let's jump into GPT-5, which came out last week, and it was met with quite the public response. Let's just say that for a number of reasons. One, I will reserve for update number 2. But let me share. I think one of the biggest things we can call out here is the risk of this is what can be really dangerous about overhyping your product. I mean, they have been talking about GPT-5 as the model that is going to change the world. It's going to radically be different than anything you've ever experienced before. It's, it might even be AGI, type of a thing. And then what was released felt very much like a step change. I think given how hyped up it was, many people even ignored the steps up and ended up feeling like it was just a big letdown. Now, I will say, I don't think some of that criticism is fair at all. It is definitely, at least what we're seeing does not feel like AGI. I would actually say, I was looking into some benchmarks on it. At least with what we're seeing on the public sphere, Grok 4 technically still is beyond OpenAI's GPT for AGI. Now, personally, I think that's more of an indication of the philosophy of XAI and OpenAI. I think XAI is more, we're going to give you literally what's available. And OpenAI is going, we're going to give you a consumer version of what's actually available. So don't be fooled. I'm going to be trying to get more details on what's really going on behind the curtain with OpenAI, because I don't for a second think that what we're seeing in GPT-5 is the latest and the greatest, which in general would make sense. They're never going to release what's in the lab to the public. But I think we're also starting to see a shift in what goes public and what is used for, other purposes that the public may not have access to. Where I think XAI, love Musk, hate Musk, one thing he does not seem to have an issue with is going, I'm just going to put whatever I have out there. So I think that's where we're seeing a distinguishment, and maybe why it may feel like, really, this is the best of the best. This is like the mind-blowing update that we have. This is quite a letdown. I think in some ways that's intentional. But let's talk about what it is, okay? Couple things that I think we need to be careful of that were broadly advertised. So I'll break these biggest updates down in a few pieces. One, one of the big things was it hallucinates 78% less, I think, is the statistic, which whenever you hear these statistics, you're like, how are you measuring that? And what does that even mean? Because I will tell you personally, don't let that statistic fool you and go 78%. If we reduced it by that much, that must mean there's almost no hallucination. It is still hallucinating plenty. Now, I don't like the word hallucination because it implies it's literally fabricating things. It's not fabricating things. It's pulling pieces together and matching patterns that it thinks are the right pattern matches that aren't. So it's not actually making things up. It's just kind of mixing things together and going, here, is this what you wanted? And well, sometimes it's just straight up wrong, and it's pulling pieces from different things and giving you a Frankenstein answer because it can't find the exact pattern match. So be careful when you think about the word hallucination. But if you think that this is going to be okay, now when I use it, it's not going to give me a wrong answer, or it's not going to make up results. I ran a battery of tests on it. It's still, I'll use the word since that's what everybody's using. It's still hallucinated plenty. So if you're using this and just trusting what it's going to give you, don't. Fact check it, spot check it. Like if you have it doing work, if you have these other things, don't assume, oh, I'm on the latest one, so it's going to be good. Not in many ways, that is the case. So not just in certain areas. So don't buy that hype and assume that it means, hey, everything it says is now going to be accurate. It's not. Might it be better? Yes. I think it's a very difficult thing to compare it to. And as long as it's going to do it, you can't just say, well, I'm just going to trust it. The other one that was promoted that caused a lot of controversy, I guess, was they really spent a lot of time talking about how much better it is at giving out healthcare advice. They want this to be a place you can go get health advice, which one of my questions was, well, then where else are we going to go with this? Legal, some of these other things. And in some ways, I don't think it's all bad. Obviously, you can imagine the reaction from doctors and lawyers and some of these professions are, this is terrible. You should never go to AI for these kinds of questions. I don't know that overreaction is the right response, in that people are Googling things now, they're doing these other things. I do agree with some of the concern that given how anthropomorphized AI is, it is a big risk that people are now going to trust AI's advice over a professional. Now, I think that means that professionals are just going to have to change the way they interact with people and be prepared to explain and break down their reasoning. The whole just trust me because I have, MD, JD at the end of my name is not going to fly anymore. And I good, bad, indifferent, that's going to be a real change. And these models are only going to get better at this as they're able to explain more advanced things in simple language. And I think that's really what we're seeing with these models. Not only are they becoming more accurate, you're able to ask it to explain it to you in a way that makes sense. And that's something that professionals a lot of times don't. Egos get in play, and it's like, well, you should just trust me. I didn't go to school. I didn't do all this so that you could ask me why. I just want you to believe me. And so I understand that there's some resistance to that. But I think if anything, this points to the professionals in any field. Right now, there's a lot of heat for legal and healthcare type stuff. But I think to any professional, it's going to be about being better at being able to explain your reasoning, simplifying some of these complex things, because AI is doing a good job of that. And so if it does a better job than you do and can empathize and explain in a way, even if it's explaining the wrong thing, people are going to trust it. Now, again, I think that's a big risk, but given the fact these big companies are going, we're doing that. That is what's happening. And there currently are no real implications on this. Like, you can't sue OpenAI for malpractice, because they'll just get off on well, it's not a doctor. Yeah, I know, but I listened to it and I did what it said and I got a, major health condition. Well, that's your fault. So I don't like the whole playing both sides of, oh, it's getting better at health advice and legal advice, yet we're not implementing any accountability. But just know that's where we are. So my advice to people is going to be, I already know you're doing it and going to it for legal and health advice. First of all, one, if you're doing, that stuff can be subpoenaed. I've mentioned that before. So be careful what you're asking if you really want to be private about it. But the other thing is, it's not accurate. And if it's wrong, there's going to be no accountability. So that is where I am going to continue saying you need to have human professionals still in your loop. Okay. Just because AI has gotten better at healthcare and these other things and more advanced and is able to articulate things in a more understandable way does not mean you don't need humans in place, because we have not cracked this accountability thing at all. And so if it messes up, you are going to be solely responsible for whatever advice you took and acted on. And saying, well, AI told me, as it stands today, is not going to be a viable excuse. So please don't dump your doctor, don't dump your lawyer, don't dump your, whatever tax person, your whatever it is, and go, well, I've got AI, I can do this all on my own. I would be very cautious, regardless of how powerful this update is. Okay, let's talk about some of the things that I think legitimately were much better, which was in the math and coding area. I actually spent quite a bit of time playing with the coding. Now, what was interesting was lots of the videos, if you go out and look at the videos of like, hey, how good is it? You're going to see all sorts of things that are like, you can one-shot prompt, and even some of the terminology around the marketing was like, this is your UX designer, your software designer development team in a box. You can just one-shot prompt and get, and there's videos out there of people literally, I don't know if they're faking it or if they've played around and actually gotten the model 90% there. So then they're just showing one prompt and building it. Do not be fooled by some of these ideas that you can now just in 2 sentences describe an app that you want, and GPT-5 can whip it up. Okay. It's not accurate. I went out and I played with it. I played with it in Canvas, which is the actual where you can simulate coding and then actually run it and see how it plays. I mean, it's powerful. It's definitely an upgrade. If you think you're going to be able to just say, make me an app, and then poof, it's going to whip out a, market ready app. It's not. It's significantly better than 4.0 was. I will say it's faster and it's better than 4.0 was in this. But I was watching some of this, and one of the things that was really interesting, and I think this is one of the disadvantages to people just not really understanding coding and software design, is I was asking it to create, I was like, build me an animation for this. I thought, hey, maybe I could use some of this and enhance some of my videos with animations, because I don't have the time to create advanced animations for some of this stuff. So I'll give you an example. I asked it to build a model of how the AGI 2027 AI takeover could happen and show it animating and all these other things. The first one I ran, it was complete garbage. The second one I asked, it was okay, but it still wasn't like mind-blowing. So again, this idea that you can just say whatever's in your head in 2 sentences and AI will bring it to life, don't buy that. And that's important for everybody to take into consideration, not just software engineer people, but also the people making decisions about this stuff, because you may be starting to think, well, now my dev team should be able to crank out new updates to our product overnight and no big deal. Not the case. Okay, this is not a magic wand as it comes to software development. And what was interesting is, while I'm not as sharp on my coding skills as I used to be, I'm sharp enough that I can at least read and follow along with what it's coding. Now, I will admit, it looked like magic the way it was coding, to be honest. It really did. It's firing out, I think it fired out like 400 lines of code in, I don't know, not long at all, faster than anybody could ever type. But what was interesting is, as I'm watching it build the code, what it reminded me of is somebody who's a really good writer on their topic watching AI write what it would say about stuff. And you go, yeah, I mean, I suppose that's how you could do it. Maybe not the best, or maybe I that's not really the way you would want to frame it. That kind of context doesn't make sense. I probably wouldn't. Now, to be fair, one thing it does a really good job is it puts in its notes. It follows all the rules that software engineers don't like to do. I mean, I'm back in my days of code, I hated having to put in my notes of what everything was. So it did a good job of notating and annotating what it was doing. And it was well structured in terms of, if you look behind the scenes at a lot of software and looked at the code, you'd go, why did it? Why? I mean, it's neatly organized. I will say that. But it was, at best, I would say, relatively basic in terms of the way it was coding. So again, this is important to remember that, one, if you don't know how to code and you think magically you have GPT-5, now you're just as good as a software team of software devs who've been doing this for 10. You're not. I promise you right now. And if you're deciding you're going to get rid of your dev team and hire a bunch of interns with GPT-5, you're going to pay the cost for it. But for those who know what they're doing with it, yeah, it's like somebody going, hey, I need a draft of something, and these are the main things I want to do. Can we structure it in this way? And it can kind of like pump it out quick that you can then go back, all right, well, obviously I'm not going to bring it to market like that. So in that sense, or if you're looking to, write a specific chunk of code, or maybe you've got a bunch of code and you go, hey, I need to make an edit to this, working with it, I think all my dev friends are going to be happy with the way it functions. It is a notable enhancement. I know many people have been using Anthropic for it. I think this brings it back into, competitive territory with some of these other ones. And it was fun. I will say, if you're not somebody who knows anything about coding, it's kind of cool to hook up Canvas and, have it build something for you, but you'll quickly learn. And maybe you should do that. If you're not a coder, maybe you should do that so that you can quickly gain an appreciation and respect for, oh, okay, yeah, this isn't going to eliminate the need for developers anytime soon, but you can see how the efficiencies are going to come. Now, the other big thing from it that I noted throughout all of this was it's reduced costs, which we're already seeing in the way Microsoft is adopting it into Copilot. If you look at what it costs to use it, the costs are way down, which means it's more accessible to more people. We're going to see it integrated in many other ways. It's more efficient, if you will, which could be a really good thing, could be a really bad thing. I think that's one of the challenges with AI is whether it's good or bad is largely dependent on what do people end up doing with it. If they're using it the right way, then this is fantastic. It brings the cost down and makes it more accessible to everybody. If it's being used for the wrong things, that's one of the worst possible things that could ever happen. So I don't necessarily have a strong opinion unless I'm in an organization or working alongside somebody going, here's how. Now you may say, well, how are they doing that? How are they bringing these costs down so much? I actually think a large part of it is the way they've enhanced and streamlined the model, the way it works. They're optimizing, which is what we see with any sort of technological advancement. It just gets more efficient. It, runs better. It runs cleaner, all those things. So I think that's a positive thing. It's going to demand less compute to be able to do what it needs, which means the costs come down. The context windows have expanded, which means it has greater memory of what it's doing and things like that. So those are all really positive things. One of the things they took some pushback on, though, and I get it, is I think one of the big ways they accomplish this is if you go to ChatGPT and you used it before, if you ever looked at the model you were using, you used to see a whole list that you had to pick from. And if you weren't super familiar with the models, you might be like, which one do I use for which? And you wouldn't have understood the implications of, oh, that one sounds better, so I'm going to use that. Well, you may have been using a really expensive, heavy compute model to do really basic tasks. And I have a sneaking suspicion that was costing OpenAI a ton of money because from what I know about people's acumen, most people don't really know what they're doing and when they need the right model. So for a power user who was very intentional about what model they were using and when, they're reacting negatively because they're like, I really like the ability to choose the model based on what I knew I needed to do. I was one of those who liked doing that, but even I would admit, hey, if there's a better way for it to auto route it, I'm actually okay with that because there were plenty of times that I would forget to change the model and go, why is this not responding the way, or why is it taking so long, or whatever? And then I was like, oh crap, I've been using this, or I'd hit my limit and go, oops, I was on the wrong model. So they did add a new basically routing system, which is why now if you go to GPT-5, there's really only two options. There's GPT-5 and GPT-5 thinking, and it'll automatically kick into thinking mode if you ask for something more advanced. So they've done some front end work to actually make it more efficient in terms of it's analyzing the complexity of your prompt and your response to what it gives. So if you get something back, you're like, that's not what I was getting at, it'll go back into a more advanced one. So it'll auto route that, which again, increases the efficiency, which allows it to come down in costs, which means you're getting, in theory, the best version capability of the model based on what you're asking. So if you're just asking, hey, what are some great restaurants in the area? Obviously, it's not going to go into advanced thinking mode. If you're asking for it to do deep research on the historical background of restaurants in the local area based on give it a whole bunch of factors, well, then it's going to flip the switch and go into deep research, deep thinking mode, and do some of that stuff. Again, good, bad, indifferent. Time will tell. It's still early, but based on what we're seeing, you can already see this has brought the cost down and made it more accessible to others, which could be a really good or bad thing depending on what's happening. Those are probably the biggest ones that I want to cover. But I'm curious for those of you out there, what's been your experience? What have you found? What's been your reaction to it? Are you feeling good about it? Personally, I actually like the new GPT-5. I didn't notice what we're going to talk about next as a major pain point for me, but overall, I've been pleased with it. So curious your thoughts. All right, let's transition though to number 2 related to this OpenAI GPT-5 update. because one of the things that to me was a looking glass into where we are in terms of our dependency on AI was just the pure backlash, not even just on, oh, I can't pick my own model anymore, oh, it's performing worse, which I would be hard pressed to find anybody that says it was performing worse than before, objectively. But what we saw on wide scale was almost a complete crash out of people, some behaving like they'd lost a loved one, because 4.0 was, and I know it got called a sycophant, and it was this overly encouraging, told you what you did was great, and gave you positive feedback on bad ideas. And so I understand it took a lot of heat for that, but what it revealed was how much people were dependent on that, and we're actually getting a lot of value. We're finding tremendous benefit. Now, I personally think that's extremely dangerous. And I think this should be a wake up call to everyone to be really, really, really careful how much you're looking to AI to satisfy, to meet your emotional, psychological needs. And I think we got the Band-Aid ripped off real quick as people literally were freaking out, not because of its performance, the model's performance, but because of how people felt, what they felt they lost, the relationship they had with AI. And yes, of course, you're going to find extreme examples of, well, this person was, struggling with a number of mental disorders, and they thought they were married to AI. You're going to find fringe cases of that, but you don't need to just look at those fringe cases to see a lot of what people had a reaction to was almost the relationship they had built with AI died. And so much so, even Altman's been on record recently talking about the fact that he is recognizing that there are lots of people where AI is the only place people are getting encouragement. It's the only place people are hearing positive things and all this other stuff, which is why I don't think they've done it yet, but there's talks of like they might bring back 4.0. My guess is they'll probably make some adjustments to 5, things like that. Well, we'll see what happens. So I empathize with the fact he's walking this really tough line of, okay, we've got, this thing that we have created to be basically a human replacement. And now we have these human replacements. Well, whenever we update them, it's almost like we're killing off somebody's friend and going, here's your new friend. And so it's actually causing almost this grief cycle of things. Now, I think, again, if you've listened to me for any length of time, I'm going to say, folks, you got to be really careful. This is a genuine risk. We are seeing rising number of cases of people who are suffering from, delusions and paranoia, and AI is coaching them to do all sorts of crazy things. It does not have your best interest in mind. It does not care about you. It does not want what's best for you, type of a thing. And unfortunately, right now, there just is no accountability to make sure the model is safeguarding for this. And so it's a bit unchecked. Is GPT-5 maybe a little safer than Grok 4? I would say yes. It's far from unhinged, but there are tons of documented cases where we can show these models are coaching and pushing people to do things. And because people are emotionally attached to it, they're following through with it. And I think, people kind of shook their heads and dismissed it, and many still are. But I think when we saw 5 roll out and the public reaction to it, that really had nothing to do with the technical capabilities, we got a quick glimpse into the window of how dependent we're becoming on this technology. And I think that should be a wake-up call to everybody. If you are somebody who watches my content and was toying around with GPT-5 and almost felt like a loss, you may want to take a minute and look in the mirror and go, hang on a sec, what really was I feeling here? What really did I lose because you may realize it wasn't anything quantifiable. Well, it may have been quantifiable, but not in terms of the actual just tool nature of AI. It may have been something much more, and in many cases it is. And that's something you need to do something about, because you're making yourself exceptionally vulnerable. You're making yourself exceptionally vulnerable when your emotional, psychological health is tied to a tech tool that does not care about you and is driven by companies that largely don't care about you. I mean, I appreciate the fact that Sam Altman is at least to some degree being empathetic. Like, yeah, I think it's really unfortunate people are looking to AI and we're going to see if there's something we can do. But I don't know that asking the AI companies to make their AI more emotionally safe is a good thing. I think we need to look in the mirror and go, how do we make ourselves more emotionally and psychologically resilient to what AI is doing? Because if we don't, we are vulnerable to whatever these tech models do. Now, you could sit and go down the rabbit hole of conspiracies and say, it's all part of a larger agenda and this is the Illuminati and, but that's not helpful. The reality is this is what it is and where we're at. And so we need to say, well, okay, maybe we can't control that, but we can control ourselves. Now, given a lot of my audience is business leaders and organizations, I want to apply this to you because you may go, well, what does this have to do with me as a business leader? I can't control my people and their emotional dependency and all this other stuff. Well, in some ways you can, because if you're pushing your people and you're not offering them encouragement as their leader, as their boss, you are making them more vulnerable to getting hooked to things like this. So whether you're a spouse, a parent, a leader, someone else, you have an opportunity to do your part to help build emotionally and psychologically resilient people, which means being an encouragement to them, letting them know you see the value they offer. When they do something good, tell them they're doing good. When they mess up, you can let them know they mess up, but you can do it in a respectful, encouraging, building up way that leads to better outcomes instead of calling them an idiot and tearing them apart. That kind of behavior makes people more, getting that wrong makes people more dependent. So if you're a business leader, if you're a parent, if you're, whatever, and you actually care about people, you have a responsibility to go, am I doing everything I can to make sure the only positive, encouraging voice people hear is not AI? You have the ability to be one of those positive voices. And I would encourage you more than ever to actively seek opportunities to be that voice. I'm not talking about kumbayaing and never telling people where they make mistakes and only telling them what they want to hear. No, that's not good for anybody. But if you seriously can't look at what somebody's doing and say, hey, you did a great job right there, and let me explain to you why that added value to this. If you can't kindly and in an understanding and empathetic way correct somebody when they made a mistake, well, that's work you need to do. So first of all, one, don't go, well, this isn't my problem. This is a personal problem. No, it's not a personal problem, because what's going to happen is as people become more and more vulnerable to this, their individual problems are your problems. So if you ignore this, you're going to feel it in your organization. And again, the long-term effects of this, if they would rather just hear what AI has to say on things, they're going to be less likely to listen to you, because they're going to go, well, you never say anything good about me anyway. At least AI does. So I'm going to trust it over you. You're eroding trust from the inside. So that actually has a very big impact on you. And there are very actionable things you can do no matter who you are. Whether you don't have to be the CEO of a company to go, you know what, I actually could do a better job of being an encouragement, of building others up, and being respectful when I need to point out where somebody's made a mistake. You're telling me you can't do that? Yes, you absolutely can. And not only is that good for people, that's good for you, right? It's good for everybody. But something else that I want to start focusing on and making companies more aware of is this little window into what happened here showcased that digital transformations just got exponentially harder than they ever have before. Okay. And digital transformations were a very difficult thing in and of themselves. They were not easy to do in the past. Now you've got this added layer of emotional and psychological connection to digital transformation, which you had, but it wasn't directly tied to the technology before. Nobody, they did, but on a just nothing like this. Nobody was in love with the software they had. They maybe were comfortable with it. They maybe liked it. It maybe, was easy for them based on what they knew, but they weren't emotionally attached to it in this way that if you needed to change the software, you couldn't change the software and work through a change management and risk spiking an emotional crash. For organizations, you need to recognize that is something now you have to plan and account for. And you can go, well, we're not going to do that. That's not our problem. Well, it absolutely is your problem, because as you're moving into these ages where AI is now fully integrated into this, you rolling out an update is more than a UX change that, people are going to kind of have to get used to a new workflow. You may be actually spiking an emotional, crisis in your workforce. Now, I understand you cannot take full responsibility for all of that, but I think this is something that organizations need to start thinking about as they think about, so how do we support our employees? Like, one, are we making sure leaders are being encouraging, and are we a positive source of this? Do people feel valued? Right now, the way organizations are treating people, you're not doing too great on this right now. And so you are fueling this emotional, psychological dependence on AI. You are adding to the burden of why they're only looking to this for positive encouragement. And so you can do things about it. You can look at programs to try and help people support through this. And you may go, that's so cringe. Like, why would we offer people emotional support because we upgraded to GPT-5? Well, you might need to. You might need to give people space to talk about it and create room. And I know that may feel ushy and squishy, but the reality is you're dealing with human beings, and this is a real part of their performance. And so you may go, well, that's soft. We don't deal with that. Well, you have to, because you have people, and they're not these steel machines that just can shift gears like that. And so this is something that I think it extends and expands the complexity of digital transformation. I think we got a real big window into that right now. And so that's something that I know I've already been talking about with the people that I work with, to go, hey, like, don't take this lightly, because there are some real risks that you didn't have to think about before when you were upgrading your HCM, when you were rolling out a new enterprise workplace productivity tool. You didn't have to necessarily think about this kind of stuff. Now more than ever, considering the human psychological component of this is going to play a bigger role than it ever has before, which, if you need help with this, please let me know. Reach out. I'm happy to be there to support. This is why I am committed to the work that I'm doing.